I've tried to get better at DNFing books this year. I've DNF'd 6 so far, so I don't think I have really stuck with my goal, and I have finished a lot of books that maybe I shouldn't have, but I'm going to talk to you about the ones that I did actually put down now. The first one I DNF'd was Fried Green Tomatoes at the Whistlestop Cafe by Fannie Flagg, which I read. It's one of my mum's. It's a book my mum recommended, but I think she must have read it in the 80s, because it is not a book that has aged well at all. And I think she also liked the film, so that might have coloured her taste of the book as well. It is set in the American South during segregation, and it's about these 2 women who are in a relationship with one another, and they run this cafe. They grew up together from children, and we see like their childhood, and it's just sort of events that happen in this place, and then also it's kind of flashes back and forward in time, because also in like the 60s or the 80s or something, we're in a retirement community, and this one woman is telling her story to an unhappily married other woman. And her recounting these stories of what happened at the Whistlestop Cafe. And I put it down because it was just really saccharine and overly sweet and not particularly interesting or well written, and also, as I said, has aged pretty poorly. Like, I know having a lesbian relationship and being like anti-segregation may have been fairly progressive for the time in which it was written, but in other aspects it really was not. So I really didn't enjoy reading that. As I said, the writing wasn't particularly great either. It was very episodic and didn't really have much of a through line in terms of plot that made me want to keep reading at all. But also it was written in a way that I think would appeal to people who like that kind of Sunday afternoon feeling in a book. They're kind of not particularly active in terms of using your brain or active in terms of plot, just a sort of easy read with an attempt to tug at the heartstrings. I think I didn't really get far enough to get to the point where I think it would really have pulled on any heartstrings, but what I did read did feel like it was going for that. The characters felt cartoonish, but it did feel like it was attempting some sort of sentimentality and some sort of emotional connection, which I didn't get, because, as I've said, the characters were cartoonish and the writing was gee golly whiz, it just didn't really do anything for me, and I ended up DNFing it because I just couldn't be bothered. I just thought, I know where this is going and I'm not particularly interested in going there with it. The one I DNF'd was 5 Little Indians by Michelle Good. This one I think I was reading for a vlog, although I can't remember what the vlog was, and it is about residential schools in Canada, I believe. 5 Indigenous First Nations Canadians who are, as children, taken off to a residential school. And it begins with one of them who's escaped from this residential school and is trying to go back to his mum. And I have to admit, I didn't get particularly far into this book. And the reason for that was that I thought that I was going to do it a disservice. I think it is an interesting and important story to tell. I read Indian Horse by Richard Ramagis instead, which also tells the story of residential schools. But I thought that the writing meant that although I was interested in this topic, I was not going to enjoy this book, and I was going to give it a mediocre review because of that. As far as I remember, the writing again felt very utilitarian, in that it was written in a way to where the plot is the most important thing, and then probably the characters, and then the writing. And so the writing itself was just to get from point A to point B. There was no attempt to use language as part of the way that you tell the story. It was just stripped, but not. I don't know how to describe it, because there can be very like stripped, pared back writing that is at the same time beautiful and interesting and doing something with the form or with the language, but this wasn't that. It was just basic writing. It was just straightforward basic writing, and it was also, the dialogue felt not particularly natural to the way that people speak. It felt more expositional and more hitting the emotions of what this should be, rather than allowing them to come out through an understanding of character. And so I didn't get very far into it, but I just felt like this could be an interesting book. This is a book that probably a lot of people would like, but it is not one that I felt was for me, and I didn't want to like give it a negative review really, and also like I didn't really, because I'd read the first 20% and I knew that I didn't like the writing, that wasn't going to change the more that I read the book. And I think I need to tell myself that more often, like, this is not going to get better. The style of writing is going to be the same throughout, and so I need to like do that more often. But I get very completionist about things, generally speaking. I always want to have done all of it, and so it is difficult for me to DNF. I also DNF'd Love Theoretically by Ali Hazlewood, and I actually DNF'd this one at 80% of the way through the book, which does feel a bit like, why did I bother DNFing it? Like, I could have just finished listening to the audiobook for the last hour or so, or whatever it was. The books that I love tend to be fairly challenging and tend to involve a lot of thinking and analysing and like contemplation, and sometimes I want a book that doesn't require that in order to be good. I want a book that can be enjoyed for other reasons, and so sometimes I try and find them. Usually I end up just having to do a reread at this point, because I'm just so difficult to please in this genre, whether it's romance or middle grade or thriller or anything like that, that is to be enjoyed for reasons of plot or character or anything like that. And so I started Love Theoretically because it was available on Libro FM's influencer program, and so it was available for me to get, and I knew that Ali Hazlewood had been like a really hyped romance writer at this time. I knew she had a size kink thing going on in her books, but I thought they might be fun and interesting to read. A lot of people like them. I really didn't enjoy this book. The humour is really cringy, and I've heard a lot of people say that about the books. The humour is cringy. Love Theoretically is about a woman who fake dates professionally and is also a physicist, and she is going to a interview for a big tenure track position as a theoretical physicist, and it turns out that the brother of someone she has fake dated in the past is on the interview panel and is also her nemesis in terms of being an experimental physicist who she's had like a huge disagreement with in the past. And that's obviously the person who she ends up like having this romantic relationship with. And Ali Hazlewood is famous for writing like women in STEM as part of her romance. So one, the humour is cringy, which you already know going in. Two, she does have a size kink, and it is a bit ridiculous. Particularly, I have heard from other people who have read this book that she goes even more overboard in this book, almost as a kind of self-parody, because she is aware that that is the way people talk about her books in general. So I think there's a line in it like, he towered over me like a towering tower, which is obviously ridiculous, but in terms of like the steamy parts or whatever, it's just all about size. Everything is about size, and I didn't care for that. You kind of know that going in. There's a size kink and cringy humour. Kind of, can you put that to one side? And for me, I did find it grating. But what I found most grating was that this is supposed to be like women in STEM, feminist romance literature about a woman in STEM who is like these are the difficulties faced by women in STEM, and this is how she is going to get through it. But she was a total damsel in distress who was completely rescued by a man, and he like told her what she should do with her life, and she made her realise who she could be. She didn't come to any realisations on her own. She didn't have any like oomph as a person by herself. She had to be directed, controlled by a man in order to get anywhere, and so it felt like it completely belied the nature of what it was supposed to be. Like, it wasn't like she was like, oh, I could, but I have no confidence, and he was like, I can see, I believe in you. It was like, she was like, well, this is fine and this is fine, and I'll just poodle along, it's cool. And then he was like, no, you shouldn't do that, you should do something else entirely. And she was like, oh, if he says that, maybe I should. I just felt like it was a super sexist book for someone who's talking about like the difficulties of women in STEM. You don't write an interesting female character. So yeah, I didn't love it. Also, like, there were two characters in this book. Everyone else was just window dressing. There was no interesting other characters or background or anything. I also DNF'd Girls Against God by Jinni Hval, and this one I think I went in with the wrong expectations for this book. The way that it talks about being from small town Norway, about white Christian values running deep, and a teenage woman who gives into the lure of the black metal scene, and she moves to Oslo and discovers a coven of witches who cook up curses, demons in the cafeteria, time-travelling Edvard Munch, and stuff. And I thought it was going to be more like weird horror, a bit magical, something fantastical going on. I thought it was going to be a bit strange and a bit like fun. I thought it was going to have some like joy to it, but it is not that. It is really fucking depressing, and it is also like way more about art and the art scene and the alternative art scene. I'm not someone who is like particularly au fait with any of that, and I don't really, it reads like kind of partially art criticism, which is not what I wanted. I thought this was going to be fun, and it just feels a bit like up itself in a way that I just couldn't get on board with. Feminist thoughts and experimental horror and a unique treatise on magic, writing and art. It definitely felt like feminist thought and a treatise on writing and art. It didn't feel like experimental or fiction or interesting, and so I ended up DNFing it. I think it's not for me. I am not a particularly art girl, and I feel like this was just so pretentious, and I've read and loved some fairly pretentious works, but this really took the cake and just didn't work for me at all. I also DNF'd Wanderland, A Search for Magic in the Landscape by Jinni, Reddy. This is nature writing, and I think again I went into this with the wrong expectations. I thought this was going to be about Jinni Reddy's experience being a British Asian woman, being interested in the outdoors and wanting to participate in like the rambling culture of Britain, but feeling like an outsider because it is such a white space, and the history of the whiteness of the space around nature and things in Britain. And there were snippets of that, but really it was about Jinni Reddy wanting to find magic in the outdoors and wanting to find something sublime and supernatural and kind of something beyond the everyday experience by exploring the natural world, and struggling to find that. Honestly, it's a bit too like woo-woo and hippie for me generally. Anyway, I'm not a super hippie person and I'm not super into any of that. I don't know how you would describe it, like getting beyond the human experience and any of that, like opening your mind to it. I think the only thing you're going to find is already within yourself in terms of that. You're not actually going to have a sublime experience. It's just your own brain that is doing that for you. But also I found her to be incredibly patronising of this. Like, she's going out trying to find magic in the world, but she's incredibly patronising of people who believe they've found like something magic and something transcendental in nature. She's incredibly patronising of them, and she goes to have these experiences and talk to people, and she's like, well, they're too woo for me, or they're too hippie for me, and I don't want to do the work or pay attention to the people and the history that is involved in these practices. I just want to have the experience without touching on the culture. And I felt like that was so weird from this perspective, like from the perspective of being an outsider in the British natural world and of wanting to find this transcendental experience, this transcendent, that's the word I want, trying to find this transcendent experience. So she's open to the hippie stuff, is like aware of people misusing like cultural experiences, but she's like super fine with some white guru in California burning Palo Santo, but she's not interested in discussions of Arthurian legend or druidic practices in Britain. Like, she's not interested in the actual history or the people. She's only interested in her own individualist experience, and I found that really grating. She also complains a lot, like it's a lot of whining, which I know this whole video is, so I can't really talk. And the final book that I DNF'd was The Great Sea, A Human History of the Mediterranean by David Abulafia, and this is a history of the Mediterranean Sea and the peoples who live around the Mediterranean Sea, from like prehistory up until the modern day, I guess, although I didn't get that far. I was only really in the historical time period, like pre-Greek, and then the Greeks and Carthage, and I think we just got started on Rome when I DNF'd this. I have been trying to read more history non-fiction this year and trying to get into it, and I found myself struggling a little bit. There is a certain style of writing that seems to come along with a lot of history non-fiction that just I find quite boring and quite difficult. It's quite a slog to get through. I feel like maybe it would work more in shorter pieces. It's something that's difficult to read a lot of at a long time. And like, as someone who is happy with academic reading and often complains that the non-fiction I'm reading is too commercial and not academic enough, I realise that I'm coming across as a hypocrite. But I think there is an amount of narrative that is necessary in historical non-fiction, like popular historical non-fiction. There is an amount of telling a story that is necessary in order to make it interesting. But also, like, at the same time, I want more analysis and less just pure straightforward chronology. I think that if you're going to give pure straightforward chronology, it needs to be more of a story, and if you're not, I need more like analysis and look at like trends and ideas more than just this happened, we think this happened, and then we think this happened. I think there there was something about this book that was quite boring in the way that it was told, and it is something that I have noticed in a lot of the historical non-fiction that I am reading. It's a lot of lists of people and dates and events without a narrative through line to make it more engaging, or without analysis, just the bare facts. And so I find that quite tough to read. Let me know in the comments down below if there's any like good historical non-fiction that you like that isn't boring, because I do want to read more. It's often that I want to know the facts in that book, but I struggle to make it through the book itself. So I would love to hear if there are any that you think would appeal to me. Those are all of the books that I've DNF'd this year, only 6 of them, and I've still managed to ramble on for quite a long time. I definitely want to DNF more often. I think that I have had a mediocre reading experience this year, and maybe that would have been improved by DNFing things I wasn't enjoying, but it is something that I still struggle with. I still feel like I can't give a proper opinion unless I've read the book, and I can't complete whatever I'm reading it for unless I've finished the book. I definitely struggle with completionist tendencies, so let me know as well in the comments how you feel about DNFing and how you manage to make yourself do it without feeling like you're failing in some way. Thank you for watching. Please remember to give this video a thumbs up if you liked it. I'm Roshin, by the way, if you haven't been here before, and if you haven't, please do subscribe. I put out new videos twice a week, so I will see you again very soon. Bye!